what all it's going to look like, all the things, but it's going to be good. So, I rarely share the message titles. I'm not a big message title guy. It's kind of like, what's the point? Like, I give a title to put online or whatever, but I'm going to share this title with you because I want you to think about it through the duration of the message this morning. And the title is simple: Puppet King. Puppet King. I want you to think about that. I want you to have those words in your head as we unpack this section of John this morning. If you have a Bible, if you have a phone, you have a Bible, open it up to John chapter 6. We're going to be in there in the beginning of that section this morning. But as we get started, so George Washington, I'm sure you all know who that is. Otherwise, we have some big problems. George Washington's impact on the birth of the United States is reflected across the country. A state's named after him, as the nation's capital is named after him. Get this, 241 townships and 26 cities are named Washington. Okay? 4 forts, 5 mountains, and 3 ports bear the name Washington. Bridges and parks and at least a dozen colleges are named after him. So imagine if you combine George Washington with like the Pope and then like Billy Graham. Okay? So put all those people into one so that Washington was not only the founder of the nation, but he was also the leader of the religion. Even if you did all of those things, all in one person, you still wouldn't come close to matching how the Jews felt about Moses. Okay? So Moses, a big deal. We're going to unpack and look at why and how and all that a little bit this morning, but Moses was their great hero. Not only was he responsible for bringing them out of Egypt and governing them as a nation for the first time, but he was also the greatest religious leader in their history. He was the one who went up the mountain to meet with God and bring back the 10 Commandments. So kind of a big deal to him. So we're going to walk through this section of John, and we're going to compare Moses to Jesus. Okay? my hope is you'll kind of see this work and unpack, and you'll kind of see how the Bible works in really, really cool ways that you might not see otherwise. So bear with me as we read through John 1 through 21. It's a big section, but we gotta work through it all for this whole thing to make sense. John 6, 1 through 21. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Remember, he had this huge crowd because of what he was doing. Because of all the acts and miracles and things that were being performed is why this crowd was following him. So Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then and seeing that a large crowd was coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread? Say that so that these people may eat." He said this is to test him, for he knew what he would do. 7, Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who had 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. And what you got to understand is if there's 5,000 men, there's a lot more people because there's women, children. So the group is massive. So we're not just talking about 5,000 people. We're talking about many, many, many more, likely into the tens of thousands. But 5,000 is what we're counting. We're counting men. So that's what we got going on here. So then, verse 11, Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. Notice all he did was gave thanks. Okay? That's all he did, was just gave thanks. And when they had eaten their fill, seated. So also the fish as much as they wanted. Then, and when they had been seated, they had their fill. He told the disciples, "Gather up leftover fragments that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him their king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. Speak of the devil. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." In verse 21, then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. So again, we have to first understand that the Jewish reverence for Moses is all over John 6. Moses was mentioned at the end of 5. One day Moses would condemn these men for their failure to believe in Jesus. We see that God sent a greater Moses to rescue his people. When reading this chapter, just in your devotional time, you wouldn't likely think or see a lot of these details, right? You're reading through it, and if you're like me, you're thinking, wow, like God did a cool miracle feeding the 5,000 from just these couple loaves and fishes. Like, that's cool. God walks on water, like, Jesus walks on water, like, that's cool. Like, this is how we read these devotionally. We miss some of the things that we're going to unpack a little bit. And there's 4 quick things we need to look at to help us understand this. And the first, that Jesus is leading a crowd like Moses did. Moses was a leader of Israel when Israel escaped from slavery in Egypt. When we think of Moses, we think of a man leading a large crowd from Egypt to the Promised Land. Second, the crowd is following Jesus because of the signs that they saw him do. Why did the crowd follow Moses? They saw the signs he did in Egypt. Moses was the one God used to bring the 10 plagues to Egypt. If you're not familiar with the 10 plagues, it's the whole thing that you can go and look at the Old Testament and unpack it, but there's basically all these things that happened to help the Israelites get freedom from Pharaoh and all that kind of stuff. But these signs authenticated his role as the one sent by God. So at that point in time, you see Moses' status and stock rising because of the things that God is doing in and through him, whereas right now you see Jesus' stock and status rising because of the things that he is doing. Third, Jesus and his disciples went up to the mountain. After performing signs and leading Israel out of Egypt, Moses and his servant Judah went up to the mountain and received the law from God. And fourth, these events took place during the Passover, a yearly Jewish festival celebrating when God rescued his people from Egypt. So the final plague was the death of the firstborn of the 10 plagues back in the Old Testament. And God commanded Moses to have each family kill a lamb and spread its blood on the doorposts of their house. If they did, death would pass over them. That's why this whole thing is called the Passover, because literally death would pass over the firstborn if there was blood on the posts. So the context of these verses show us that Jesus is walking in the footsteps of Moses. Jesus is revealing himself to be like Moses. But now, anyone could lead a crowd up a mountain at Passover, right? Like, anyone could rally a crew and be like, all right, let's go up the mountain. That by itself, not a big deal. Everything else, though, it's huge, and it matters. So the first thing this morning is Jesus miraculously feeds people. So Moses had a difficult task ahead of him. He had to lead the nation of Israel out of slavery in Egypt, across the wilderness to a new home called the Promised Land that God gave them. And you have to understand, the size of this nation makes it difficult because it's between 1 and 2 million people. Imagine that, 1 and 2 million people. It takes me a hot minute to get my family of 4 in the car to go to North Dakota, okay? I can't imagine guiding 1 million or 2 million people through the wilderness. Can't even get in the car. So, the big problem they had was food. I mean, how would you feed this many people? You're on the move, so you can't stop and plant crops. You can't grow things. You don't have time for that. You're moving through the wilderness. You're constantly on the go. You can't pack for 40 years. They didn't know they were going to be out there 40 years. I mean, think of a backpack. Like, even if you're a military person, you've got MREs and all these tightly packed things. You can't pack for 40 years. Who wants to eat an MRE for 40 years? They're okay. They're okay. But we see that God provided their food. He told Moses to tell the people that he would send bread from heaven so that they could eat. Every morning, this bread, called manna, would be on the ground. And they could take baskets and collect enough to feed their family that day. Any extra would spoil overnight. The next day, manna would be back on the ground for that day's meal. So we see God providing food, God providing their needs. So now we see Jesus facing a similar situation, don't we? Large crowd following him. He asks a disciple what to do. Think about this for a second. Why? Like the verse tells us, but if you're really unpacking this, like why? Why is Jesus asking Philip this question? And ultimately it's so that he could see how Philip would respond. And to point out that when he does something, he being Jesus, does something miraculous, they understand how truly amazing it is. He's trying to set this up. He's trying to unpack, walk them through, teach them some lessons as they move. Jesus wants his disciples to fully understand who he is. He could have done it without them, right? He could have been like, oh, crowd, food, there you go. Eat, feast, go nuts. But he didn't. He wanted them to understand his power so that they would believe, so that they would have a deeper faith. The miracle isn't just for the hungry people, it's for the disciples as well. So we see that Philip points out the magnitude of the miracle. He's setting this up. Cost more than 200 denarii. That's like equal to a day's labor. So this shows how big the problem is. Even if they worked for 8 months to get the money. Say they just worked and got all the money collected and it finally happened. Where are they going to buy anything? They're just out there. It's not like there's a Costco down the street where they can just go buy a bunch of bread and fish in bulk. It's not exactly working that way. Ultimately, human ingenuity couldn't solve the problem. Because we live in an age of great technological advancement, we sometimes act as if we're invincible, don't we? This passage is a great reminder that we are always to be confronted with problems that are too big for us to solve. Like, can't solve death, we can't solve disease, we can't solve war. Well, those are the big ones, but even if we shrink them down to personal size, we realize how truly powerless we are. I mean, who can stop themselves from getting sick? Anybody? I mean, I take a lot of vitamins and I still can't slow that train. Who can make sure that they're never misunderstood or mistreated? Anybody capable? If you are, come tell me, because I've not figured this one out. Who can make sure that everyone likes them all the time? We are powerless, just like Philip. Like Philip, we're quick to look for human solutions. A problem comes and our mind starts racing, our mind starts going, we try to start figuring out, how can I solve this? How do I do this? We're going to fix it. And like Philip, we forget who's standing with us. Jesus asked Philip the question so Philip would learn that no problem is a match for Jesus' power. Not one single problem is a match for Jesus' power. So then we have Andrew. Andrew brings this boy with his lunch. And like, if you're me reading this, you're thinking, oh, Andrew, oh, that a boy, Andrew. Like, this guy's got some faith. This guy's got it figured out. He knows that Jesus can multiply this. Like, he knows that Jesus can do something with this. And then we're immediately let down, aren't we? Immediately we see him say, but what are they for so many? It's like saying, I mean, here, Jesus, here's some scraps. I don't know what you can do with it, but here you go. I tried to find you something. Obviously, we can see that this wasn't going to be enough food. No way could this feed them all. Now, we could be really hard on the disciples, couldn't we? Like, I mean, they've been with Jesus. They saw water turned into wine. Hello, like, come on. And, like, of course he can pull this one off. But let's pause for a moment and think about our own lives. Think about ourselves here for a second. How many times do we see God work before we stop doubting? Think about that. How many times do you see God work in your own life before you stop doubting? Like, I'm asking for real reference because I haven't figured that out yet. I haven't mastered this one by any stretch of the imagination. When I face a situation that seems impossible, I look for human solutions, just like Philip did. I'm a problem solver. Let me go fix it. Let me go figure it out. I'll just get after it. If I don't see any, then I worry or despair, kind of like Andrew did, thinking, what good will it do? What difference will it make? There's a small boy with a small lunch of small fish. It's hopeless. It looks like everyone's going hungry that day. Then just like Moses, Jesus fed the multitude miraculously. There's no magic. There's no funny business. He prayed, thanked his Father for what he was about to do, and turned 5 loaves and 2 fish into an essentially all-you-can-eat buffet. We see that in chapter 11, as much as they wanted. Not like, hey, I can only get the miracle so far, so like everyone's got to cut it into 4, okay? Share the bread, share the fish. No, it's like, hey, eat. Go for it. All they wanted. When Jesus supplies, it's never too little. He never runs out. Jesus loves to go above and beyond not only what we can ask, but even what we can think, what we can imagine, what we can conjure up. Jesus has never run into a problem he can't solve. Think about that. I run into problems all the time I can't solve. Jesus has never yet run into a single problem that he can't solve. No wine at the wedding? No problem. Easy. No food in the wilderness? Done. Got this. No life in the tomb? No problem. When we follow Jesus, we never reach a dead end. We never reach a dead end. Now check this out. This is when things get a little fun for me. So after he finished, this is verse 12 to 13. After he finished, he had the disciples collect the leftovers into baskets so that none would be wasted or lost. Why does Jesus care about the leftovers? Like, he just made this miracle happen, multiplied this thing so everyone could eat as much as they wanted, and he's worried, like, hey, let's collect the leftovers. Let's make sure we get everything. This context comes up again a little later in the chapter. Jesus says, "This is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose none of those he has given me, but should raise them up on the last day." Jesus never wastes anything. Nothing of his will ever be lost. He's showing the disciples his care and illustrating what it means that he will not lose any of those who belong to him. If Jesus cares enough to make sure none of the leftovers are lost, how much more will he make sure none of his people are lost? Just like Moses, thousands of years earlier, Jesus cares for each and every one of his people. He provides for the food they need in a way that shatters all human expectations. So that's the first thing we see this morning, is that Jesus feeds people. The second thing is Jesus miraculously crosses the sea. This also gets a little fun when we dig in. I'm having fun. I don't know if you guys are going to have fun, but I'm having fun. So going back to Moses, after leading Israel out of Egypt, Moses finds himself in a pretty big pickle, right? Like, they just leave Egypt. All of a sudden, there's a gigantic, mean army following them, and they're running away, doing their thing. However fast 1 to 2 million people can move. Like, yikes. And they're moving, and they hit this pickle, this gigantic pickle being water, right? Like, they can't cross this thing. They're stuck. What do? There's nowhere for Moses to go. But what happens? God tells Moses to stretch out his staff towards the sea. When Moses did, God opened it up. He divided the waters. They marched through on dry ground. Remember that in a second. Marched through on dry ground. Pharaoh's army tried to follow, and the walls of water collapsed on them, drowning them and their horses. If you're like me, I don't know why the horses had to die. Like, I wish they could have trotted out without their owners. Like, hey, horses, it's a great day. But poor horses. So Jesus sends the disciples across the sea without him. Sea starts to get choppy. Things are getting crazy. In fact, it's so bad these experienced fishermen spent most of the night rowing and only made it halfway across. Now, for context, this is all but 6 miles. Okay? This isn't a gigantic ocean, some huge body of water. 6 miles. These are experienced fishermen. This is not a tough task for these guys. But why is the water so choppy? What does it say? Because a high wind, a powerful wind, was blowing. So work with me here. Do you know what God sent to part the Red Sea when the Israelite nation needed to cross? Exodus 14:21-22 says, Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back with a powerful east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with the waters like a wall to them on either side, the right and their left. God caused a powerful wind to blow so that Moses could miraculously lead his people across the sea. Jesus walks the sea as effortlessly as if he was on dry ground. Think about that correlation for a moment. Imagine just for a moment how crazy this would be. But why did he do it? Why not just meet him there? Why not just show up on the other side and be like, look at that miracle I did. I crossed before you guys did. Jesus walked on the water for the same reason he fed the 5,000. So they would witness his power and understand who he is. They revere Moses. He's saying, I am greater than. One author wrote, when they see Jesus, they're scared. They're witnesses to deity. They've seen something that is so far beyond what's natural. They're confronted with a being far more powerful than they can fathom. Here, in the midst of the storm, they don't fear the storm. They fear the maker of the storm. At this moment, on the Sea of Galilee, the disciples were confronted with a power beyond their reckoning. They saw the power of God and they were afraid. But what does Jesus say? Don't be afraid. There is a God with power our minds cannot fathom. He is just and will someday use his power to right all wrongs and judge all sins. We know that. We see that. Yet through his Son, Jesus, he reached out to each of us and says, you don't need to be afraid. If you believe in Jesus, if you receive him, there's no need to fear. With these two miracles or acts, Jesus shows himself as one like Moses. He feeds people and he crosses the seas, both in ways that require divine help. Some who see this make this connection and they call him the prophet. He is the prophet the nation of Israel has been waiting for. A prophet would come who would do mighty signs and wonders like Moses did. Century after century, Israel waited, and here he is. It's go time. This is awesome. We're ready. They see works of Jesus and recognize the fulfillment of Moses' prophecy. The last point today is that Jesus is greater than Moses. And this may seem pretty obvious to us, right? Like, Pastor, okay, thanks for the elementary lesson. I get Jesus is greater than Moses, but think about this. What was Moses' greatest accomplishment? He brought the nation of Israel out of slavery in Egypt and into the promised land. He's the great liberator, right? To these people, he's the great liberator. When Jesus was born, Israel was in slavery again. Not in Egypt, but in their own land. The Romans conquered Israel and made it part of their empire. When someone like Moses shows up, what do you think the Israelites want to do to him? They want him to lead them out of slavery. They want Moses 2.0. Let's go. Let's get out of here. Let's get freedom. Let's do this. They want to start a revolution and overthrow their foreign captors. Here's a crowd of 5,000 Jewish men chafing under Roman oppression. They recognize the second moment, Moses, and they think, finally we will be free from Rome. No longer will we be slaves in our own cities. Let's make Jesus king and take back the kingdom. But what happens? Jesus thwarts their plans. He sees this coming. He saw the revolution in their eyes and he leaves. But why? Why leave? Here's the thing. Jesus wasn't worried about victory over Rome. He was after a greater victory. Jesus came to wage war against sin and suffering. He came to duel with death. They wanted to make Jesus king, but before he would ever wear the crown of gold, he chose to wear a crown of thorns. Before he would sit on the throne, he would hang on a cross. The crucifixion would come before the coronation. Moses won a great victory, but it pales in comparison to the victory Jesus won when he rose from the grave, triumphant over death and hell. So this has to make us think a little bit. This has to make us pause and reflect about our approach to Jesus. The Israelites wanted to make Jesus their king by force. They wanted Jesus, but they wanted him to be their puppet. They would follow Jesus as long as he did what they wanted, as long as they overthrew Rome. They wanted Moses 2.0. They wanted someone to lead them out of their immediate circumstance and situation. It's not Christianity. We do this to people all the time. I'll hang out with you, spend time with you as long as you agree and live the way I want you to live. As long as you do and say the things I want you to do and say. It's not Christianity. Jesus is no man's puppet. But how often we come telling him what we want him to do. We bargain with him about things, right? Like, okay, God, if you give me this, I'll do that. I know this is what you're telling me to do, and you're asking me to go witness, you're asking me to go talk to my friends and lead people to Jesus, and you want me to go to the mission field, you want me to go be a pastor, you want me to do all these things. I'll do it if you do this for me. If you do these things, I found myself in this situation just these last couple months, folks. Almost going through the if game of God saying, I've got something else for you. And me going, God, I don't get it, I don't understand it. This doesn't make sense to me. God, I don't know how you're ever going to sell my house in this market. Good luck. But if you can do that, then I'll go. If you can do that, then I'll walk in faith. God's going, bro, you got it backwards. You walk by faith first, and I'll show you how big I am. I'm not a puppet to be used for your bidding. When you walk by faith, I'm there. We claim to follow him as long as he doesn't say or do or ask us to say or do anything we dislike. Right? It's really easy to follow him in this room, isn't it? To worship and sing songs, to hear a message and go, oh, God is good. And then what do? We go to work and we say nothing. We go to school and we do nothing. We go out into our community and we look no different, act no different than they are. We want Jesus when it's convenient, but don't ask me to do anything out of my comfort zones. I can't do it. I won't do it. Not me. Pick somebody else. There's a couple other 100 people at church. Go find somebody else. I'll be here when you got an easier task. We want the kingdom without the king. We want liberty without the liberator. We want all of the blessings Jesus can give us without actually obeying and following him with our lives. If we want Jesus to fix all our problems, but we don't want to have to follow Jesus, all we want is a puppet king. That's all we want. All we want is a puppet. We want another Moses. We want someone to get us out of our trouble and make our lives a little more comfortable. Lord, if you can deliver me from this situation, I'll serve you. I'll follow you. Lord, as long as I'm comfortable, as long as I got a roof over my head, as long as I can pay the bills, as long as my car runs, as long as my friends are nice to me, I'll follow you. We want a puppet. Jesus is so much more and so much greater. The only way to come to Jesus is to lay down your expectations. Put aside your requirements. Let go of the strings and follow him. When you do, you will find that not only is Jesus greater than Moses, but Jesus is far greater than anything you can ever imagine. Folks, I've stood up here for nearly 2 years on this stage. And every Sunday, it's kind of the same thing. Salvation and Jesus and his goodness and his hope and his freedom. But you got to grab it. I can't grab it for you. The next pastor can't grab it for you. Your small group leader can't grab it for you. The person leading your kids in Awana can't raise them and shepherd them for you. You've got to grab it. You've got to get into the Word. You've got to do this yourself. You've got to realize the God you're serving isn't here for you. You're here for him. Let go of the strings and follow him. Jesus is far greater than anything we can ever imagine. So what do you want? This is the question of the day. And I don't mean this as a heavy question, but it's a question we have to ask ourselves every day. What do we want? What do I want? What do you want? Do you want a puppet king to do your bidding? Do you want something that just makes you feel good? Or do you want a real king that will lead to true freedom and salvation? Church, I'm going to tell you, one requires no change and nothing in return. You want a puppet king? That's easy. It requires no change of you. But I'm going to tell you, there is nothing in return for that. You will not see God move in your life in the big and mighty ways he has planned for you. But one requires you to change everything, but offers everything in return. So that's the question this morning. Will you follow? Will you obey? Will you lay down your pride, your insecurities, your hopes, your dreams, your desires to follow Jesus, to follow his desire and will for your life? If not, you want a puppet. If not, you just want a Jesus you hang on the wall. So that's the choice that you have to make each and every day of your life. Do you want to pursue a puppet, or do you want to pursue the king? Again, one requires no change and brings nothing. One requires you to change everything, but brings everything. I can't tell you how many times I have seen God move in my life and the lives of people around me as we step and we walk in faith. The faith comes first. We have to walk in faith. We have to trust that God has a plan and a purpose for our lives, a plan and a purpose for this church, because I'm here to tell you he does. Just because I'm leaving doesn't mean anything stops. Things get better. Things grow. Trust God for what comes next in this church. Trust God for what comes next in your life. Walk in faith, almost daring God to show up. Like if I step out here off the stage and he doesn't catch me, he'll catch you. He's going to show up time and time again. It's not going to be in the way you think it is. It never is. But he shows up time and time again. So who are you serving? Who do you want? What do you want with your life? What do you want with your relationship with Jesus? Do you want a puppet that does your bidding? Or do you want a king to give everything you have to? Let's pray. Lord, I am so grateful. So grateful that you continue to move in my own life. That you continue to use me for your good, Lord. A fallible, problem-ridden person that you choose to communicate your gospel. Lord, I am grateful for that. Lord, I pray for each and every person in this room that they would see you. They wouldn't see you as a puppet to be used for their bidding, to be used as a cash machine, to be used as financial prosperity, to be used as whatever it is, God, but they would see you as the king to give everything to serve wholeheartedly and all on board with your mission and your passion and your purpose for their lives. Lord, I pray that you would show up in mighty ways like you did with the disciples. When you ask these questions of how is it going to be done, and you show up and you go, there it is. Lord, show up in the lives of this church. Show them how real and powerful and mighty you are. Lord, I pray right now that you'd begin to heal people of whatever ailments they carry, Lord. The things they've been carrying around forever, that you would heal them, Lord. Lord, I pray that you would bring financial stability to people that are working their tails off and trying to follow you and trying to do all the things you've asked them to, that you would bring them financial stability. Lord, I pray for families in this church that you would bring peace and wholeness and connectivity, that your gospel would be alive and real at the dinner table and on the way to school and on the way to work. Help us to follow you each and every day of our lives, to see your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Not my will, not our desires, our hopes, and our dreams, but yours, Lord. Help us to follow you each and every day, through the good times, through the bad times, and everything in the middle. Help us to stay committed to your truth and your gospel, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Church, prayer teams are available. If you need prayer this morning, please go and receive prayer. Otherwise, would you stand with me and close in worship?
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. Sing with me today. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When darkness seems to hide his face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. Amen. Believe that today. I'm going to have Joe mention before, as we close today, what's going to be happening after the service here.
Good morning, church. I just want to encourage everybody to stick around if you can for the business meeting.